All right, welcome everybody to another Open Game Data Office Hour session. Just do a brief intro of what these are, and then I'll hand it off to Curt. So the Open Game Data community is this NSF-funded research incubator where we are looking to convene a community of people that are interested in using data in and around games to understand various aspects of human psychology, learning, decision-making, etc. And part of our goal here is to compile a collection of resources and best practices to do this kind of stuff, and that's one of the goals of this office hour session. But then also long term, we're looking to build some shared infrastructure to actually be able to do this stuff together. And so another thing these office hour sessions are helping us understand is what are the needs of the community and what are their interests. So how these office hour sessions work, they're inspired by a series of sessions that the Statistical Education Research Group used to do here at CMU, where a